Is Elizabeth Jeffrey Franco, and I'm the communications director here at the Sonoran Center. I'm a white woman with blue eyes and light brown hair, parted down the middle and pulled into a low bun. I'm also wearing a sage green cardigan. I'll be leading today's session on digital accessibility, and I'll also be joined shortly by my colleague, Drew Milne. Today's 101 session is going to be an introductory overview of digital accessibility. This is a very, very broad topic, so we won't have time today to go in depth in any one area. But at the end of the session, we would love to hear from you which areas you would like to see deep dive trainings on in the future. So today we will cover the basics of accessible design, digital content structure, accessible links, social media and video best practices, and how to write alternative text. We have a couple of exercises planned, and as Selena mentioned, if time permits, we will answer questions at the end of today's session. Now, it's a given that everyone deserves access to resources and information that can improve their lives. And at this time in human history, access to digital content is a critical aspect of equity. Digital content consists of any information or communication accessed or displayed in a digital format or medium as text, image, audio, or video. Whether you're sending an email, writing a document, managing a web page, or posting on social media, it's essential that you make your content accessible and ensure that your message comes through clearly to your audience. Now, digital accessibility is the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites, digital tools and technologies, and other resources by people with disabilities. It means that all people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with electronic information and be active and contributing members of the digital world. Most people are familiar with accessibility features in physical spaces, like a public restroom that can accommodate people who use wheelchairs, for instance, or a crosswalk signal that produces both visual cues and sounds. But the same types of principles can be applied to digital content to ensure that all users have equal access to information and services. Visual, auditory, physical, cognitive, and neurological disabilities should be taken into account when implementing accessibility measures. Digital accessibility is all about designing resources for everyone. This builds a stronger and more diverse online community and broadens participation. It ensures that all voices are heard, and importantly, it upholds human rights and equal opportunities for people with disabilities. Many people who have disabilities use assistive technologies, which are tools that help them navigate the physical world and the digital world. But the assistive technologies that allow people to use and interact with digital content only work if we create content that is accessible to those technologies. This means that we need to carefully choose our language, color scheme, layout, and structure of digital content. Even if content creation isn't your main job responsibility, it's important to have knowledge in this area so that you can help advocate for accessibility in your organization's online presence. So here I have some common barriers to digital content. Images, graphs, and charts without descriptions. Video without captions on your website or social media. Visual only or audio only content. Inaccessible links. Inaccessible use of color in design. Improper content organization, and inaccessible language. Now, language can refer to language in the sense of English or Spanish or American Sign Language, but it can also refer to language in terms of cognitive accessibility, like appropriate and accessible reading level. So one approach to increasing accessibility of your writing is by using plain language. We won't be diving into plain language today, but the Sonoran Center recently hosted a training all about it. This was actually hosted by Drew Milne, who's going to be presenting with me in just a few minutes. And it was a phenomenal training held just a couple of weeks ago. You can find the recording at bit.ly/plain language training or by scanning the QR code on your screen. So plain language is a style of writing that uses cognitively accessible language, as I mentioned. And when we talk about cognitive accessibility, it means that your writing is easily understandable by anybody, including people with different intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, so now let's move into accessible design. An important aspect of visual design is choosing the right fonts. In serif fonts, the tops and bottoms of the letters contain decorative edges called serifs, which some say bear resemblance to little feet. Whereas sans serif fonts are more clean and block-like. They're less decorative than serif fonts. Sans serif fonts are recommended because they have slightly higher readability than serif fonts. Now, there are many accessible serif fonts like Times New Roman, but in general, they're slightly less readable because they contain those little decorative elements, and sans serif fonts do not. So here are some visual examples of accessible fonts alongside some examples of inaccessible fonts. Or the inaccessible fonts are much less clean and consistent, and they do have a lot of variability in character spacing. Some of the recommended accessible fonts are Tahoma, Calibri, Helvetica, Arial, Verdana, and Times New Roman for professional reports. Here at the university, we use an accessible font called Proxima Nova. We also use Calibri and Times New Roman when appropriate. Your organization may have brand guidelines that dictate what fonts you use in your marketing materials. And so it's worth investigating whether those fonts are accessible, and if so, making sure that you're adhering to your organization's brand guidelines, or if they're not accessible, you can make recommendations to your organization about choosing more accessible fonts in their branding. Now, when designing digital content for your website, social media, email, and documents, it's also important to use accessible colors. Accessible colors are color combinations that have enough contrast to make layered elements such as text or icons on a background clearly distinguishable to those visually impaired or deficient in color vision. You will want to make sure you stick to high color contrast pairings. Generally, just use white on dark backgrounds, as we're doing here. Be sure to keep colors simple to avoid overstimulation and confusion. And avoid using color as the only indicator of meaning or information. If you're going to use color to indicate meaning, you should always also use an additional element to convey information, such as shape differences or text labels. Here's an example of accessible and inaccessible color pairings. So the accessible examples show great color contrast, whereas the inaccessible examples do not show enough color contrast, and therefore they are much less readable to diverse audiences. The red and green pairing at the bottom of the inaccessible list looks like it has good color contrast, but red and green should not be used in combination, as that pairing is inaccessible to people with color blindness. It is a good practice to use color contrast checkers that can grade color pairings based on your contrast ratios and will let you know if your colors pass based on universal accessibility standards. So we have one example here, which is being shared in the chat and on the screen. You're welcome to use that. That's what my team uses here at the Sonoran Center to check color contrast. So here are just a few other basic design considerations. Letter and line spacing. Line height is best at around 1.5 times the font size, and letter spacing at least 0.12 times the font size. Left alignment. So large blocks of text are more easily read and accessible when they are left justified versus center justified. Center justification is okay if it's just little snippets of text in your design, but anything like a paragraph should be left justified. You want to avoid unnecessarily complex designs and patterns that could muddy your message. And also beware of Canva presets. My team uses Canva. I love Canva, but Canva templates, even though they look gorgeous, can often present accessibility issues in terms of spacing, font, color, and more. So if you're using Canva presets in your digital design, make sure that you're adapting them to meet accessibility standards. Another important aspect of accessibility relates to links. Are your links easy to find in the text? Are they descriptive of where your link goes or what may happen if they're clicked? You'll want to make sure that you write clear and unique link text so that the user knows where the link is going. Link text should make sense outside of context, as screen readers may pull up a list of links on the page, like the example here on the left side of the screen. You can see that some of the links are labeled in a descriptive way that indicates where the link will take you. But you can also see there are several links that just say click here that are not labeled in a helpful way. Where will those take us if we click here? You will also want to make sure that links are distinct from other text using both color and underline. Another thing to consider is that assistive technology may read long URLs aloud, depending on where that content is used. So it's best to embed links in places where you are able to, or use custom short links. You can create a free account with Bitly or a similar type of software where you can easily create short accessible links and track your clicks across multiple platforms all in one place. Another benefit of using something like Bitly is you can easily create QR codes to use in your communications as well. So let's go ahead and consider these 4 examples. Let's say these examples are being used in an article online. Now, 2 of the examples are more accessible than others. So example 1, use this link, https://sonorancenter.arizona.edu/programs-services, yada, 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 to learn more. Now, long hyperlinks may be read aloud, right? So that's probably not going to be best. Number 2, learn more here. Okay, that's shorter, but hyperlinks without context might be confusing. What are we going to learn more about if we click that link? Number 3, our website includes a Priett's webpage where you can learn more, and Priett's webpage is embedded with the URL there. I like that one. It kind of gives context and also shows us exactly where that link is taking us. And then number 4, learn more about Priett's. The entire thing is hyperlinked. So both number 3 and 4 look better depending on where they're being used because they have context and clear description. So now let's touch a little bit on digital content structure. Well-structured content allows more efficient navigation and processing. Digital media such as web pages and documents with well-structured content are essential for many users. For example, people with cognitive and learning disabilities can more easily find and prioritize content on a web page or document. People using screen readers can skip to the main content directly and navigate to sections that are important to them. Keyboard users can browse pages in their sections more efficiently. Otherwise, users might have to press the tab key multiple times just to navigate through all of the links in each section. People using software that only shows the main content of a web page or document, such as people with cognitive disabilities, will receive much better results if the page structure is correctly marked up. People with visual impairments, including people with low vision, have cues that provide orientation on the page and in the content. Mobile users often have access to a so-called reader or reading mode that will only show the main content of the page if it is correctly marked up. And people using certain browser plugins can use landmark roles to jump to specific sections on a page. These are all benefits of having your digital content structured properly. But there are additional benefits as well. So beyond those experienced by people with disabilities, other benefits include, for instance, search engine optimization. When your page is properly set up, you're going to have better SEO, meaning that search engines are able to better index the content on your page, which means that people will more often land on your website when they Google search terms related to your organization's work. So as we talk about structuring a page, you might be thinking, what does that even mean? So here are a few tips for digital content structure in your documents or web pages. We're really talking about using those title and headings tags. So are your titles and heading unique and descriptive? Do they provide hierarchical structure? Headings and titles are style elements that may be applied to sections of text to provide structural information about the content. It's like creating an outline for your document or web page. These will be invaluable for people using screen readers while also assisting your sighted users. Web page titles should be unique and descriptive. You may or may not know web page titles will also display in the browser tab of your website. You want to use only one heading 1 or H1 per web page or document. And then you want to go through and use hierarchical order, H1, H2, H3, H4, and make sure that you're not skipping heading levels. So for example, if you're writing a report and you have what should be an H2, but when you tag it as H2, the text looks too large for your design preference, don't jump in and make it an H3 or H4. What you'll want to do is leave it tagged as an H2 and then just use the regular font tools to adjust the sizing of that font. So Word docs, PowerPoint decks, PDFs, and other documents that are shared online need to be structured and tagged properly in order to be accessible. An accessible document provides the instructions to assistive technology such as screen readers to read the content properly and in the correct order. The tag order within the tag tree will determine the reading order of the document. So I just want to highlight that image files on their own, JPEGs, GIFs, and PNG files, don't allow you to tag or structure content. So image files are not a great way to share text online. You would need to share images through platforms with accessibility tools. Like, for example, you can share an image file on Instagram, and then you would need to add alternative text within Instagram settings using Instagram's accessibility tools to describe what is being displayed in that image. So does it really need to be a flyer? I'm smiling because I'm often asking this question myself, and it's a question you should also be asking yourself and the teams you work with. PDFs are a versatile and convenient way to share information, and I know they're oftentimes asked for But PDFs are not structured properly very often, which can create barriers for people who need to read and understand information. So before you create and share a flyer online, here are just a few possible alternatives to consider first. Consider sharing the content as a web page. It's much easier to maintain and update web pages, and web pages are generally going to be more accessible than PDFs. Your audience is more likely to read a web page than to download and read a PDF, especially on mobile. Consider using Google Forms or Qualtrics forms instead of PDF or Word doc forms. A web form is also easier to create, and it's going to be much more accessible. Plus, collecting data in this way is much more streamlined, allows for things like autofill access, which is also helpful for people with disabilities and people without disabilities. And you'll have better version control if you use digital forms like that. You can also consider sharing content directly in an HTML email using an email marketing platform like MailChimp or Constant Contact. Many of you might be familiar with those platforms. Creating an email that way in HTML is going to be more accessible and easier for you to create than creating a PDF and making it digitally accessible and attaching it on an email that you send out. So did you know Word, PowerPoint, and Adobe Acrobat each have their own built-in accessibility tools? Google Suite products do as well. I know many of you are probably Google users. You can find the accessibility tools on the top toolbar in Microsoft products or on the side panel in Adobe, depending on your settings. You may have never noticed it there, but if you were to open it up on your computer right now, you would likely see these icons exist in your toolbar. In the chat, I just see a comment from Mark. What about Jotform? Jotform is another great example of an accessible web tool that you could consider for web forms. Yep. Okay, so speaking of examples, here is a screenshot of Adobe Acrobat. I have a random PDF pulled up here. On the right-hand toolbar, you can see that there is an accessibility tool down near the bottom of the list. It's that purple circle with the outline of the person inside of it, and it says accessibility. Okay. If you open Adobe Acrobat on your computer and you don't see the accessibility tool in there, you'll just want to click into more tools to find it there. And from more tools, you can add it so that it always appears in your toolbar. So within accessibility in Adobe, you can do things like run an accessibility check on your PDFs. The accessibility checker will flag any issues. So you can see that on the left-hand side here where it says accessibility checker. There are many different areas that it is checking when it runs the accessibility check. This example looks pretty good through the eyes of the accessibility checker, though you can see the checker flagged that we need to add alternative text to the image there of the young woman showing the Band-Aid on her arm. We're going to be talking about alternative text in just a few minutes. So while the accessibility checker is a good tool, it is not perfect. I want to be clear about that. You should use it as a first pass for accessibility to make sure that there aren't major problems being caught by the software, but it does take a careful human consideration to ensure that a document is fully accessible. So you can navigate to accessibility tags. You can see on the left-hand side, it's the icon that looks like a price tag. And that's where you can check to confirm that your document is tagged so that it can properly be navigated by assistive technologies. You can also set the content in proper reading order using Adobe to ensure that screen readers are reading content from top to bottom and left to right and moving through the document's elements in a logical order. Right? Like if we were looking at this document, we would want to read the title first, then we would want to read who should get a vaccine, move into those bullet points, right? We would want to approach it in a logical way, the same way that someone with sight would approach a PDF. Claire asks a great question in the chat. How do you add alt text on an image within a PDF? If you're in this view right now, you could hover over where it says number 4 and click that, and it would bring up an option to set alternative text on that image. Or on the right-hand side, in our toolbar here, where it says set alternative text, if you click that, it will automatically detect all images in the PDF and allow you to input alt text that way. Okay, so document accessibility is a very complex process and has many aspects to consider. It also includes things like list tagging, link tagging, appropriate metadata. We aren't able to cover all of that today, but we did want to kind of give you a preview here. But if you want to build skills in document accessibility, I recommend that you join our in-depth training on July 12th. You can learn more and register by visiting bit.ly/document training or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That training on July 12th will cover a step-by-step on how to make PDFs, PowerPoint decks, and other products digitally accessible to people who use assistive technologies. Okay, social media. After our last plain language training, we heard from many folks that you would like to hear more about accessible social media posting. So here are sort of the highlights on how to make your social media presence accessible. So social media can be an invaluable tool to teach people and spread information, but only if your content is accessible. Social media is constantly changing with accessibility features evolving over time. It's important to stay up to date on platform accessibility features. The good news is accessibility has become a larger priority for many social media platforms in recent years, with platforms now including things like alt text and auto-generated captions. And it's important to be familiar with each platform's accessibility features and resources. Some social platforms or some specific aspects of social media may be less accessible for some users, such as Instagram stories. Those are those temporary slides that only that disappear after 24 hours. Those are not fully accessible to many assistive technologies, unfortunately. So it's best practice to post your social media content in multiple formats and on multiple channels, ensuring that people can access the information in their preferred ways. So for example, you wouldn't want to only promote something in Instagram stories. You would also want to put something on your Instagram grid. And that same content you would want to share on Facebook or Twitter or across your other channels as well. As an added benefit, an integrated marketing approach in which you release optimized content across multiple channels is also a highly effective marketing strategy and can help you increase your reach to people with and without disabilities. So this is just another example of how accessibility and good marketing go hand in hand. So let's compare the PDF flyer, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, and the corresponding social media image on the right. The flyer on the left was designed as an 8.5 by 11-inch PDF. It was made digitally accessible and is being shared around as an attachment on emails, and it's also being printed and distributed in rural communities, which is great. However, that product itself is not going to be suitable to be shared on social media. The social media image on the right, rather, contains much less text, since additional context goes into the social caption. Putting text in the caption allows users to change the size, color, and language to suit their individual needs. So it's best practice to adapt your content for each of your channels. Ideally, while you and your teams are developing assets, you can plan for all of the various digital channels that you plan to promote through, and you can design a set of complementary assets accordingly. I always find it easier and more efficient to approach it that way, as things like accessible color combinations and alternative text can be carried over from one design to the next, and more easily adapted if you're working on everything all at once. So here are some considerations for those social media captions. Spell out acronyms on the first mention. Your audience might not be familiar with common acronyms, especially on social, where they might be exposed to your content for the first time. Also, some assistive technologies will read acronyms as a word, and that can be confusing. You must include URL in the caption. A QR code on a social image alone is not accessible, okay? So if you're sharing a QR code on an image, you also need to have that URL in the caption. Beware of long URLs on Instagram. URLs in Instagram captions are not clickable, and you cannot copy and paste from an Instagram caption. So if you're sharing a URL in an Instagram caption, it needs to be something short and phonetic that someone could remember and take to their browser. Social must include alternative text, which again, we're going to talk about in just a moment. But image descriptions can be used in the caption for additional contextual information. And finally, be mindful of emojis. Emojis are ingrained into the fabric of the internet and social media, but unfortunately, they are not 100% accessible and inclusive for everyone. For example, if a brand uses an emoji to convey something different than its literal meaning, this context may be lost when interpreted through assistive tools like screen readers. Or if you use the clapping hands emoji between every word for emphasis, which you may have seen people do that online, a screen reader user will hear clapping hands after each word. And this is true for any emoji. And this could be distracting, annoying, and disorienting, if you can imagine. So the message you're trying to emphasize will likely be lost. It's best to avoid emojis, or if you'd really like to use one, just use one at the end of a caption and make sure that it imparts some sort of meaning. So let's talk about using hashtags. Appropriate spacing between words improves readability, but hashtags on social media don't use spaces, right? So we recommend trying to use camel case for hashtags that are meant to impart meaning. So camel case means capitalizing the first letter of multiple words in a hashtag, which makes the hashtag sort of appear like it has humps, like a camel's back, I guess. And that makes it easier for people to read and understand the hashtag. So check out this example on the bottom of the screen. We have hashtag Women's History Month with the W and the H and the M capitalized. And that is going to be much more readable than hashtag Women's History Month, all lowercase. I use this as an example because this is a hashtag that might impart meaning. At the end of your post, you might want to include that to draw attention to the fact that you're sharing content related to Women's History Month. So a few more tips about hashtags here. Don't insert hashtags in line. Add hashtags at the end of a post caption, not in the middle of a sentence. If it's in the middle of a sentence, it can create an interruption for screen readers. Put blocks of hashtags in a separate comment. Huge groups of hashtags aren't great for accessibility, but if you must use them for reach, you'll want to add them via a separate comment rather than at the end of your main caption. Now, on social media or in any of your digital presence, avoid using or creating videos and animated images with excessive flashing or excessive movement or flashing. Motion can trigger epilepsy, migraines, and other issues for people with vestibular conditions. So if you can, just avoid posting videos with excessive movement. And now remember, all videos need to be accompanied by accurate captions. So the implementation of accurate captioning needs to be included in the planning and production of your videos. So build it into your timeline. Captioning takes time. Build it into your budget if you're able to outsource captioning to a third party, or make sure that your staff is trained on how to do it themselves. Auto captions are not accurate enough. So for a video to be accessible, auto captions need to be manually corrected. If you upload a video to YouTube, for instance, you can take advantage of the automatic subtitles tool within YouTube and go in and have a staff member review and edit those automatic captions to make sure that subtitles are fully correct before you publish the video publicly on YouTube. It is also best practice to include audio or written video descriptions for video imagery, especially for videos with words written on the screen. So I see we have a question from Claire about what we should include in a video description. A video description can just include a general description of what the video is about and also description of any imagery happening. So as I mentioned, if it's something like you're conducting an interview and you have a written question on the screen before a response, you want to make sure you're including text for those written questions. All right, so we have a quick exercise here. How would you improve on the following social media caption to make it more accessible? So the social caption I have here, which is just a purely made up example, says, join us for our next employment and transition webinar on November 6th at 11 to learn more about how we help people with disabilities find and keep meaningful jobs. I have some fun emojis and hashtags and a link to register. So you don't have to fully rewrite it, but in the chat, just let me know, is there anything that stands out that you would improve on in this caption? Yep, we have too many emojis in here. Spell out November. That's a great tip. Shorten the URL. Yeah, lots of good suggestions in here.
Yeah, fewer hashtags.
So here I have just an example of how we could improve it, but you all bring up very good points, how we could improve it further as well. So you can see I spelled out November to make sure that that's easily read and interpreted by assistive technology. We just got rid of the emojis altogether. The emojis here weren't really communicating anything meaningful, right? So we don't need them. Also, just got rid of the hashtags. We can add them as a separate comment because all of these hashtags, they're going to be great for us to reach new people on Instagram, but they're not really adding any meaning to the caption, right? Like what is hashtag AZ adding to the meaning here? Nothing. So we'll just drop those down into a comment. And then finally, as Loretta and others mentioned, we'll want to shorten up that link to make it more accessible. Okay, so we're not able to embed links on social. So for instance, if this were on Instagram, it would look just like this, but we want something short and phonetic that someone could take to their browser. All right, one more exercise before we move on. Here's an example of a social media graphic. Let's say that an intern created this for us to help us promote World Autism Awareness Day. Let us know in the chat, what are some ways to improve accessibility on this? So yeah, as you can see, the major ones have to do with inaccessible use of font. While these fonts are very fun, and this does look like it was written on the whiteboard, maybe with chalk, that's not going to be accessible. We need something cleaner, a sans serif block font to make it more accessible. And then, yeah, good catch at the bottom here. There was good color contrast on the other one with the red and green, and maybe the intern pulled the colors from this background image, but using red and green together is not accessible to people with color blindness. So a few of you in the chat also mentioned that that social image needs to be accompanied by alternative text. And of course, you're absolutely right. Meaningful images hosted on social media, websites, and within other digital documents and flyers must be accompanied by alternative text. Each of the main social media platforms include options for you to add alternative text to your images. So here's an example on the Instagram desktop application. So when you go to make a post, you can go into advanced settings, accessibility, and it pulls up a text box for you to go ahead and write your alternative text. The same type of thing exists on all of the major platforms. So here's an example from Facebook that looks very similar. On Facebook, when you go to share a photo, you'll go into Edit Photo, and then you'll navigate to the alternative text section where you can opt to put in custom alt text. Okay, your custom text is going to be more accessible and preferred over AI generated alt text. We have a great question here from Alicia in the chat. Can you choose either alt text or image descriptions? Alicia, I believe best practice is to do both. Alt text will describe the image explicitly, and then image descriptions can provide like a little bit more context. We think of an image description more like a caption of the image. So it's best practice to use both. And Pavi in the chat is asking, what is alt? Thank you for bringing that up, Pavi. Alt stands for alternative. So alternative text. See alternative text or alt text used. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our content coordinator and language expert, Drew Milne, who is going to talk a little bit more about alternative text. Drew?
Thank you, Lizzie. Once again, my name is Drew Milne. I'm the content coordinator and a peer mentor at the Sonoran Center. Visual description: I am a white man in his late 20s with short brown hair, clean shaven, and wearing a gray button-down shirt. You may remember me from the last iteration of this series talking about plain language, and I'm very excited to be here to talk a little bit about alternative text. So getting started, what is alternative text? Well, one of the best definitions I've found, it is descriptive text which conveys the meaning and context of a visual item in a digital setting. It is read aloud to users by screen reader software, and it is indexed by search engines, meaning that search engines like Google or Bing will incorporate it into search results. It also displays on the page if the image fails to load. Many people with disabilities benefit from alt text, such as those with visual impairments, dyslexia, and others. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the basics of alt text. Firstly, it should be short and descriptive, not longer than a sentence or two, and it contains information relevant to why you have included it, meaning that it fits in with the context in which the image is presented. Next slide, please. Continuing with the basics of alt text, you do not need to include the words image of or photo of in the alt text. These are added automatically by screen readers. You need to add alt text to all non-decorative images, and I will talk a little bit about what a decorative image is and what to do with that in a little bit. And for things like logos, you may need to be more specific. So for example, below I've put the logo of the Sonoran Center's Circle for Indigenous Empowerment. For the alt text, you wouldn't simply write the logo for the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment. You would write that and also add a circle divided into 4 quadrants showing desert landscapes and surrounded by disability accessibility icons. Next slide, please. Grammar and punctuation. Using correct grammar can enhance the experience for screen reader users. You're going to want to capitalize the first letter and end whole sentences with a period. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, context matters. So let's talk a little bit about what that means in practice. Take this image, for example. With no context, one may write something like a mostly empty stadium. If you were to put the same image on an article about recent turnout for track tryouts, The alt text would read instead something like Harvard Stadium with two lone runners bounding up the steps. And again, if you were to put the same image on a page about renovation projects, the alt text may read something like Harvard Stadium with cracked concrete pillars. Next slide, please. Let's break down the different types of images that you can use. Informative images require informative alt text. These are the most common, and they convey important information to the reader. Active images form an action, like following a link when one clicks on them. And these images, the alt text needs to describe what the action that the active image will do. Decorative images are purely for decoration, meaning that they do not convey important information to the reader. And complex images, like graphs, require additional information in the page text. Next slide, please. Going into a little bit more detail, if the image is being used to link to another page, the alt text should describe what will happen when the image is clicked, rather than what it looks like. For example, the alt text for an image of a question mark that links to a help page should be contact support, rather than question mark. Complex information, images with complex information. If the image is a chart, a diagram, or illustration, consider how to convey the information contained in the image using both the alt text and the page text. Avoid repeating information. So if the text of a page describes the information in the graph and goes into detail about what the graph says, the alt text may simply say something like a graph displaying the information collected in the study, or perhaps a bar graph or a pie chart, if that is what the format of the graph is. Next slide, please. I mentioned decorative images earlier, so I will go into a little bit more detail about that. Decorative images, which don't provide relevant information, can sometimes break up the flow of screen readers. For example, stock photos, basic non-clickable icons next to text, and for example, a generic magnifying glass icon next to a field labeled search. When trying to determine if an image is decorative, ask yourself, without this image, would the reader still have all of the information I'm trying to convey? If an image is purely decorative, mark it as such by entering blank in the alt text field, or use the accessibility tool to checkbox mark as decorative, depending on which platform you're using. And Pavlina says, why not repeating? Well, if a screen reader repeats information, this makes the experience of reading more difficult, it takes longer, and it's inaccessible to people who use these assistive technologies. Next slide, please. You can use one of several testing tools to hide images and display their alt text. You can ask, does the page make sense with the images hidden, replaced by their text alternatives? And ask yourself, do all the linked images meaningfully describe their action rather than just their appearance? Can we move to the next slide, please? So, we have some exercises here about alternative text, and you can try your hand at it. So for this one, what is appropriate alt text for this image on a web page promoting student research opportunities? And please post your answers in the chat. Allison says, 4 students stand in front of a poster with results of their recent research project. Excellent. Group of 4 students smiling, standing in front of an informational banner, sharing information about their research. Very nice. So the alt text that I would use, a group of 4 smiling students standing in front of a large research poster. It is short, but it still conveys all of the necessary information displayed in the image. And Next slide, please. Alicia Vasquez asks, when do we include info about race or racialization? In my experience, when that is relevant to the information conveyed in the image. So, for example, if it's an article about African-American students, then perhaps that would be relevant in the alternative text.
And Drew, that's absolutely right. I also just wanted to chime in on that. So absolutely, when it's relevant to the content being shared, and then you'll also just want to make sure that you're consistent in the way that you refer to race or ethnicity. So we want to make sure that we're not considering whiteness to be the default, of course, right? It's also best practice we found when we're posting authentic photos of people like headshots. You can go ahead and ask the person to write their own alternative text. That way they can choose whether or not they feel like it's important to disclose or identify themselves in alignment with a specific race or ethnicity.
So moving on to exercise number 4, let's try another one here. What is the appropriate alt text for this social media post promoting vaccination? So what we would use is an illustration of a person wearing a surgical mask, flexing to show a bandage on their upper arm, under the words, "Are you up to date?" Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Drew, for that. We really appreciate it. Make sure that you test your new designs with people, mobile phones, and automated tools. Drew and I both shared several online tools that you can use today to check your content and make sure that it is accessible. Hello, everyone. My name is